She is the creator of Remember Our Mothers, a program formed in 2017 to help women of color find peace and build resilience by drawing strength and courage from the legacy of their mothers or mother figures. She deepened her knowledge base by becoming a certified grief specialist through the University of Wisconsin-Madison Graduate Studies, a program certified by the Association of Deaf Education and Counseling, ADEC. She holds a BSc in Neurobiology from the University of Massachusetts Amherst and a master's certificate in Public Health from Boston University School of Public Health. Her professional experience includes 20 years as Division Administrator Director at Brigham and Women's Hospital and Community Engagement Director at Randolph Public Schools in New Jersey. Kristen's mission is to support those experiencing loss due to death or other separation. She draws on her training and personal losses of both parents, family members, and integral friends. She understands and acknowledges mourner's experiences and helps create space to fully grieve, find meaning, and ultimately grow through loss. She offers the Remember Our Mothers program and Your Grief Specialist LLC support services for adult women, individuals, and groups, as well as grief educators for businesses and organizations. I present to you Ms. Kristen Tangishaka.
Thank you so much, Henny. And thank you, Anne-Marie and the board members of DAHEI for inviting me here today. So I thank everyone and welcome to this time. Before we get started, I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes just setting the stage for this conversation. Having conversations about grief sometimes can be taxing, and that's okay. But I'd like us to just take a minute to settle ourselves. The other thing I would say is that I invite you to please consider emotional and personal safety. So for those who are off visual screen, that you're in a comfortable place in your home, that you're not driving or out where your safety or attention might be compromised. That's really important. So I'm asking you to please be present, to please note your own privacy, and to be protective of your privacy. If you need to get a glass of water or tissue or something like that, please, this is the time to do that. And then the last thing I'd say is when we're about to do this work is I'm going to ask us to go through what I call the 3 G's. And that is, we'll take a minute to ground ourselves and just take a breath together. We'll take a minute to offer a little bit of gratitude just for the fact that we're here, even though there are so many of the ones in our heart who are not. And then we'll take a minute to offer ourselves a little bit of grace. And so I'm going to just invite everyone to please, if you are not driving in the place where your vision is needed, close your eyes for a moment, please. And I'm going to invite you to just take a slow, deep breath into your body, whichever way is easy, in your nose or your mouth. Deep breath in. And then out again. I'm going to ask you to do that again one more time. In. And out. And while you continue to just breathe in slowly and breathe out slowly, I'm going to ask you to settle into your seat. Relax your shoulders, relax your back, relax your forehead, relax your arms, unclench whatever is clenched. Deep breath in and out. And I invite you to say to yourself that all is well with me today. We're not qualifying it for how you felt this morning, what went wrong in the afternoon, but just in this moment, all is well with me today. Another deep breath in and out. And when you feel ready, after one more breath in and out, I'll invite you to open your eyes and join us back on screen. All right. Thank you for indulging me with that. And then I'm just going to say, can we take 20 seconds to, in your mind, pick one thing, just one thing that you can be grateful for in this minute right now. And say that to yourself. I am grateful for a comfortable space to live for me. You can just say that to yourself. And when you've done that, I have one more ask of you, which is I choose to forgive myself for whatever I'm holding against me. All right. So I hope that was helpful. And if you're still working it out in your head and your heart, that's perfectly okay. But I'm going to go ahead now with sharing a little bit of information about grief. So as Henny said, I've been doing this work since about 2017. And basically what I hope to cover today is I'll talk a little bit about what grief actually is, what it's not, so the facts, the myths, and then some strategies. And I want to thank everyone who sent in questions when you signed up. We'll try to get to those. And if we don't, and you're in the room, please make sure to raise your hand and ask that question. I'll only probably be speaking for 8 or 10 minutes or so, considering the time and making sure that we have Q&A together. All right. So there are many misconceptions about grief, and I'm going to start there before we actually come to what it actually is. But you've heard them all, right? People say it moves in stages. People says that it's linear. There's a right way to grieve. It's God's will. Time heals all wounds. You have to be strong. Sooner or later, you have to get over, or sooner or later, you have to move on. Grief is there to help you find closure. Grief can be tackled like a problem to solve. Or that if you have a situation where, in fact, you're experiencing grief that's not tied to someone having passed away, people will say, well, you can't really be experiencing grief. And so those are just a few of some of the things that are actually myths and misconceptions about grief. What grief actually is, it's a cascade of emotions that are a reaction to loss. In many cases, that loss is due to a physical death of a person. And in numerous other cases, it is due to a separation from a person, a place, a situation, or a circumstance. So you can experience grief that has nothing to do with someone dying. And it can come as sadness, physical pain, numbness, you name it. The cascade and list of reactions that your body will offer as it's dealing with grief, I don't think anybody has even cataloged it all. The other thing I'd like to share is that grief as a reaction again to loss is unique to every single person. In fact, it's been said that it is as unique as your DNA. Every person experiences it in their own way. Over the past 30 or 40 years or so, in this community of work, there have been steps, that have been stages that have been put out. These are all just theories of how we think grief works. But the truth is, it doesn't go in any specific stages. There's some common things where when you experience a major loss, there's some shock, right? And then the next thing may be that actually denial, like, no, I can't believe it. It can't be true. And then it may be go to actually bargaining, like, wait, no, if there's something I can do, I'll be willing to do this in exchange for, keeping that person here or the situation being resolved or reconciled. And then finally, at some point, you might get a little sad about it or even a little depressed about it, like when it's beginning to be clear that it is what it actually is. And then some people may move, we hope eventually we all get to a point where there is some little bit of beginning to accept what the situation is. And how you begin to then go about your life incorporating the loss. That word is very important for how at least I carry on this work, incorporating the loss into your life. We're not asking you to move on. We're not asking you to run away. We're not asking you to leave it behind, right? Your lifespan is your lifespan. And we hope that we can incorporate that experience as we continue to go through our lives. Often grief itself is what you experience inside, right? It's the feelings, you feel it on the inside. Sometimes it actually feels like your heart is actually breaking, right? You have headaches, you can't sleep, you're restless, you name it. You have uncontrollable hunger, you have uncontrollable no appetite, you name it. The physiological symptoms are many. And then one thing I'd like to be sure we understand is mourning. Sometimes the terms are used interchangeably, but mourning is then really how we carry our grief. So it is what's conveyed and what's communicated. So you can experience grief on the inside when you're crying and, arranging a funeral and all those things. Those are part of the mourning things that we do in taking care of our grief. There are many types of grief, many types. The last time I checked with some of the experts, there's over 40 different types of grief, and it's just tied to specific situations, right? Again, many people think you only experience grief when someone dies, but you can experience grief, again, at a divorce. You can experience grief at estrangement or abandonment of a relationship. When things end, you can experience grief when you've been separated from your work, from your job. Many of us are immigrants, you can experience serious grief when you're separated from your country and culture. You can experience grief that's considered traumatic grief when something violent and sudden happens, like accidents or so forth. It's grief, but that specific type of grief is called traumatic grief. There's grief that you may feel that is anticipatory if someone's going through a long illness and you actually can't figure out why you're experiencing these symptoms, but the person's here. That's an anticipatory sort of grief. Your body and senses are aware that something's coming and a major change is coming. You may begin to already respond to that. And then there is delayed grief, where something may happen, a loss may happen, or separation may happen, and you're like, I'm fine, I'm good. 3, 4, 5, 6 months, 2, 3 years later, though, it can rear up and it will surprise the goodness out of you. But we all, need to be aware. That's my job, is to try to educate all of us that these things can happen, because if you don't have a context for it, it can really throw you out of whack. There's a type of grief that's called disenfranchised grief, which is you're grieving for something that people didn't know. Many moms who might experience child loss by miscarriage or an early death of the child or fetus, where they haven't had a chance to tell people, may keep that private. And so they grieve in a way that's sort of disconnected, because they can't get the full community support that you would if everybody was already aware. And then there's collective grief, which we all have experienced in the past several years with COVID. And many of those situations that we saw on screen where, people were actually really experiencing violent deaths. So that's just again, a little primer that there are many different types of grief. And some of them tied with actual physical death, and many of them tied with situations, circumstance, and so forth, right? There are many different ways of supporting. There are many different strategies that you can employ to support yourself. And so I'll leave that right there, so then folks can ask questions and I can come back in with responses. How's that for now?
All right. Thank you very much, Christine, for just laying that foundation and kind of taking us along with you and just setting us in that frame of mind, and also sharing, especially that there are so many different ways in which that we can experience grief. I think a lot of times we do feel like the only time that we or someone should be experiencing grief is through death, but or experiencing the death. But I like the fact that you've shared that many other ways that we can actually go through that experience.
Yeah, so I was just going to ask Kristen, so you mentioned the different types of grief. I'm wondering, are these different types characterized by different symptoms? So you mentioned some of the symptoms, right? Do these different types of the pain, do the different types of grief, whether you're grieving from a loss or grieving from divorce, the symptoms differ?
No, not necessarily. So again, starting with that first thing I said, which is that grief is as unique as your DNA, where because of the way we process our lives, it may have been an absolute shipwreck when my mother died for me. And my symptoms of feeling heartbroken, feeling like I couldn't carry on, feeling like, forget husband and child, why am I here? Um, those were my symptoms at the time. And I want to be wary about saying the word symptoms versus signs or ways that it's expressed, because one of the things we're trying to do, at least in my work as a support specialist, is not to clinicalize grief, because we want to keep it accessible since all of us experience it. So that example of, again, the loss of my mom shipwrecked my entire life. For someone who did not have that sort of relationship with their mom, and in fact might have had a situation with their sibling or their sister or an uncle or aunt, their response to how serious that was to me in that case might be different. So you can have the same symptoms and signs over many different situations of grief. There are no specific ones that are tied to death or divorce or other emotional separation. No. But thank you for the question, Anne-Marie.
Thank you, Christine, for your excellent presentation and sharing, your personal journey. Can you give us some tips on how to cope with grief? Because I think that's a tough thing. We may be grieving about different issues, but how do we cope?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I think one of the first things I try to share for all of us is sometimes when it, before it happens, but when you find yourself in the situation, one of the first things I would say is giving yourself space, allowing yourself the space to actually grieve. Many times, because of all the rituals and arrangements that need to happen, if it is a physical death, we don't carve out time at all. And sometimes, that's okay. You can't help it. People need to travel, plans need to be made and so forth. But when that's done, you got to carve out time and space for yourself. And, if it's, a weekend, an afternoon, whatever, where you just sit with yourself and let yourself feel what you're feeling. The second thing I would say is to give yourself permission to feel it. Many times life, as we know, once all those arrangements are made and come and gone, everybody else is ready to go on with life or normal life. Your obligations don't change necessarily, right? If you're a parent, you have a family, you're working and so forth, those things don't necessarily change, and you have to quote unquote get back to them. So giving yourself permission to do that, and then advocating for yourself. So what do I mean by that? Hopefully there is at least one or two people in our lives that you can be absolutely real with. And you're going to ask those people to say, listen, the next few months are going to be a little rough for me. I don't know what it'll look like, but can I count on you? Can I buzz you up? Can I call you? Because I've started inviting us to do that preemptively. Because again, when folks get on with their life and start, going on, you're the person who lost your loved one or the situation or circumstance. It is foremost in your mind, not theirs. So you will help yourself by identifying what I call someone in your care team, a friend, a neighbor, aunt, uncle, whomever. This usually is some one person. And it doesn't have to be someone that you can bare your whole soul to, but someone who has the capacity to just show up for you. And that's not usually something that we actively do. We hope our bestie will be the one. We hope that beloved person that we can usually get along with can, but sometimes they're not equipped and they don't have that sort of emotional capacity to just be with you in that time. So the part about carving out space and time, giving yourself permission to feel what you feel, and then begin to create a care team. And I'm sorry that that may sound clinical, but you need someone that you can call up when the grief burst hits. So I just said a word, grief burst or grief attack or grief wave. Those come. We've all experienced them where it may seem out of nowhere. You have a whiff of a perfume, or you smell a certain type of food that might remind you of someone, and you're back in that place where your whole heart is heavy again. That's a grief wave or a grief burst or a grief attack. And so when those happen and you can step away, great. But sometimes you need to call someone and say, whew, I just need you to just be on the phone with me. Let me breathe through this. So what I advocate for us is to begin to take a more active role in the way that we care for ourselves, just like we would, if your leg was broken, you would be making plans for, okay, someone's going to come help me with the cat. Someone needs to help me hold my run crutch. You would be making plans to help take care of yourself. We wouldn't just leave it. And many times, unfortunately, because we haven't been informed that it's okay, we just leave it and we're left alone in the thick of it by ourselves in our house.
Hello. Thank you for what you said. And thank you for talking about how grief is all crazy and all over the place. So I have a close friend who lost her son, her pretty young son. So me and some other of her close friends are trying to help her deal with it. It's been pretty recent. And Can you speak to strategies for how to help her and to how to help the other people in our friend group deal with this? When it happened and we were there, it was easy just to sit with her, but we don't live there in person, and it feels odd sometimes just to sit on the phone in silence. But I've done that before. So do you have? And I also feel like sometimes if I call her, it's like maybe I'm burdening her because she's dealing with so much. So could you speak to that?
Thank you for that question, Natasha. And may I say thank you for being one of the people who could sit with her and hold space for her. It is emotionally heavy, and I'm sure she appreciates it even more than she's been able to articulate. So I would say when you mentioned about speaking to her on the phone or being available on the phone and not saying anything, the loss of a child is very, very devastating. As we know, there are hardly words to explain it. So how long has it been, masked?
End of January.
Okay, yeah, fairly recent. So I would say to continue doing what you're doing. She probably is not at the point where she's willing to hear about, resources outside of just her friend group yet. But what you can do in the meantime is begin to access those so that they're at the ready when she does get to the place where she needs a little bit more support outside of just you all. And there, so if she's in the States, there are multiple resources and places for parents who have lost children, like really helpful ones where she can be at a place with people who can hold space with her, but who have gone through a similar thing and are able that you can share, so she can share the experience with. And sometimes that is so meaningful, even when you have the support of your loved ones and your friends, but being in that space with people who have gone through the same thing can speak to those internal things that are experiencing that you can't even articulate. What I said before, for looking around her life, are there parts of her responsibilities that you all can begin to help her take up? So sending food or checking for whatever the other things that she needed to be responsible for, those are things that the friend group can assist with. Groceries, sending someone to clean, all those things actually help because they take away from her having to expend energy keeping her life in order. And then queuing up those. So there are so many more than most people know resources, particularly for again the loss of children, so that when she is ready, and she may begin to say things in some weeks or months over time, that she needs a little bit more support or so forth, that you can then begin to share those with her. I would say the other thing for the other people, Natasha, is that you all can talk with each other, but it can and it can not to psychoanalyze each other, but just to share the fact that you're sharing this experience together. Because sometimes you get so caught up in being the support for her, all of you, thinking of ways to support her, that you forget that you yourselves have, in a way, experienced the loss as you're, supporting her, right? And that's really meaningful, helpful for the people who are the ones that are being, standing up in the pillars in that situation.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for saying that.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
All right, Anne-Marie, say your hand.
Yeah, Kristen, I wanted to ask, so are there specific things that you can say or you recommend saying when you're trying to help someone who's had a loss and they sort of close that space, right? They're not opening it up to you, even if you're their friend. They're being very closed up and want to grieve on their own. And sometimes for fear of not burdening you, right? Not realizing that you want to help. How do you get them to open up? Are there certain things that you say? Are there, because usually you're lost for words. You don't know what to say.
Thank you for that question, Anne-Marie. And so there are a couple of things I'll mention. Research has shown that actually there's a particular hormone, I'm forgetting the name, that actually is activated during grief. So it's not that they're trying not to burden you, but that they actually cannot. Like there is a phenomenon called grief brain, where literally your brain is hijacked by hormones because of the experience of loss. You cannot really think straight and analytically the way you normally would. You can't process in the same way that you actually normally would. So sometimes, and I just want to offer that to you and all the friends, the supporting friends in the room, sometimes it's not that they're actually trying to keep you up, but again, like because of the extremity of how they experience in the loss, it literally hijacks your brain. It also hijacks your body, as you know. So people develop physical symptoms of things that were never there before, hot flashes, palpitations, you name it. When my father passed when I was 11, my mother developed a full body rash for weeks. No cause other than that she was grieving. And there was nothing to do other than bear it until it began to dissipate as she gradually began to, sort of settle into accepting the situation and beginning to, slowly be okay with it. So I want to offer that. the piece about things you can say, I'll say for one thing, what not to say. So I mentioned those at the top of the presentation. Sometimes when we've all grown up in many different circles in our culture and in our, spiritual spaces and so forth, where people will say things that are meant to be kind or comforting, but actually that are not. They really are platitudes, and they pacify, and it hurts. So I'm pulling out of a prior conversation, Anne-Marie, for it sometimes is absolutely perfect to say, I don't know what to say. You can say those specific words. I don't know what to say, but I'm right here for you. If you find yourself searching for words to say, you can say that. You can see some iteration of it for, this absolutely sucks, and I'm here for you. Because I say all those things because we're being real. That's what it really is. It sucks. You feel cheated. It's horrible. But many times instead we would say, oh, if there's someone ill, that might be in a better place. Or, if you're someone in a body of faith or believing, oh, God's plan, or, it's those things sometimes when you're in the throes of grief actually are very hurtful. Because the flip side that is being implied is the better place is not here with me. And that's all you want when you've lost a loved one. You want your loved one here, earth, living, breathing, not anywhere else. And so thank you for that question. But that's what I would say, that is perfectly acceptable to say, I don't know what to say, but I'm right here with you, and I'll sit with you as long as I can.
That's very interesting. Very, very good point, because I'm recalling I had a very close friend who passed away. And, people have the saying that they say angels belong in heaven. And so they say this person was an angel, so they've gone back to heaven, that sort of thing. And now I'm thinking about it, this is the worst thing to say.
It's very hurtful.
You think you're saying something nice, that your loved one was an angel, but yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. And people say that all the time, that, oh, he's gone to a better place, or she's gone to a better place. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
So, Kristen, can you speak to dealing with guilt, and especially the guilt of knowing that you've not really done anything to cause that separation, but you now have to deal with that separation, or actually deal with the consequences of that separation. So it may not necessarily be a death, but it could be a separation of someone that you care deeply for, but now you've grown distant, or now for some reason, you guys have become separated, but you're grieving over the loss of the relationship, or the breakup that you probably cannot fix, for lack of a better phrase. So can you speak to how we deal with that?
Yeah. Thank you for that question, Henny. And so you framed it in the sense of like a relationship that may have gone estranged or separated and so forth. And I'll add that actually in the case of physical death, there can be guilt too, about what you think you might have been able to do better or not, right? All of those come in. And so I think the first thing I would say is being able to acknowledge that you're feeling it, because sometimes we feel it, we know what it is, but we're not going to put a name to it, because that means fault or shame. And we don't want to put that on ourselves. So it is absolutely okay when the first thing is admit and say to yourself, this feels like guilt. I feel guilty about this, because that's not a shame, and that's not a fault. It's just an articulation of a feeling. I have a headache. It's an articulation of what's happening with my head. It doesn't mean I caused my headache. So I want to be sure that we say that to ourselves. And then I think the thing to do that you can start to do is spend a little bit of time, if you're able, examining that feeling with yourself. Right. And you reference, okay, maybe the things you might have done or could have done or might have intended to do. I would make note of what those were. And I would also make note that almost all the time, even in a situation or relationship or the situation of physical death, everything about the guilt is behind you, has already happened. And that creates a marker in time. And that marker in time then presents an opportunity when you've had said to yourself, these feelings that I'm feeling are actually feelings of guilt. And I'm not shaming myself. I'm not faulting myself. I'm just admitting that that's what those emotions are. That marker in time then now says, okay, if there's anything to be done about this, what can I do? First thing you would do is offer yourself grace. Because any remediation that can happen, if it's a relationship and a person that's still on this side, on earth realm, you have to offer yourself first, which is offer yourself grace. And if there's forgiveness that needs to happen, you offer that to yourself first. Nobody can give you that but you. You offer that to yourself first. And then the next part of, okay, what can be done about it is it a situation where I reach out? Reach out doesn't mean that you call and meet face to face something. It can be a note, it can be a text, it can be a whatever. And it may be one small step of many that you end up taking. But as a grief specialist, I would say every tiny little bit small step is meaningful. It may not always feel helpful, but it's meaningful. And when you've done that, you come back to taking care of yourself. You send a text, days, weeks, months, didn't hear anything, you feel bad, you begin to beat yourself up, shouldn't have even bothered, why did I put myself up there, so forth, right? You come back to taking care of yourself. Wow, Henny, that was a bold move to make. You've really grown in this way. Wow, I didn't think I'd ever get to that place. You give yourself credit for taking those steps. And then you put a marker in it for, all right, I'll cycle back and check on it again in a few weeks, a few months. It's not something that you put yourself on the treadmill and just consistently keep running, right? Guilt or feelings of guilt, whether warranted or not, can be like a drawer. You pull the drawer open, you examine it, you check it out, okay, put it back in the drawer, and you continue with the other things that are priority to you right now. Is that helpful?
Thank you. Yes, very much so. Thank you. Anybody else would like to ask a question? The floor is yours. Just raise your hand. And so we have Maria. Yeah. Go ahead, Maria.
Yes, thank you, Christine, for your amazing talk and all the tips that you mentioned. It's definitely been very helpful. So one thing I definitely appreciated is you stating that grief is a unique experience to each and every individual. And as I've been getting older, I've definitely felt myself like thinking of, with my parents getting older, the inevitable of that grief associated with the loss of a person. So what would be your advice to somebody who has not yet experienced that type of grief, in the inevitable that they will eventually experience that loss of a person, and like how to navigate that?
You may not like my answer, but as you were speaking, and thank you for the question. That's a bold and brave question to ask, Maria. And I understand, right? As you're sort of going out of your, early 20s into older 20s, 30s, you see things changing. I would say that the preparation, and again, this is not prescriptive, right? You can hear it and go, she's crazy. But the preparation for that would be to actually live every single moment with the max amount of gusto that you can put in with those beloved people. Because then whenever that time comes, and we pray that it's very far, 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 far away into the future, when it comes, you will have anchor moments of experiences and time together and sentiments and joy that you can then use to hold you as you mourn their loss. And for our community, because we often talk about death is taboo, for as you spend time together, talking with them about what they think for themselves about their transition and so forth. Brave, bold. But those things are important because when those times come, they minimize the confusion. It is perfectly okay and acceptable, all of us Black people, to have conversations, and they can be hypothetical. Well, what would you like? Oh my goodness, can't even believe it's going to be crazy. What's your favorite thing? Those things are important now, because then you'll know that when those situations come, what needs to be done, and there won't be bickering and fighting about what their thoughts and wishes might have been.
And you're right. In our culture, you talk about death and it's like, you want me to die? Like, why are you talking to me about death, right? So that's a very good point.
Right. And there is a game that's a deck of cards. I'll put it on that list that I'll send to Anne-Marie and Henny to send out. That there are two types, or a deck of cards that you can play like a game that spur questions around legacy, preferences, and not just around death, just in general, between the generations, because they're conversations we should have anyway.
Hi, good evening. I recently lost my sister, and I am just trying to figure out how to function. I honestly just feel like a robot right now. I have to get up, so I get up. I have to go to work. I go to work. But if I'm not doing those things, then I am just in bed. What can I do, or how can I get out of that phase that I'm in?
My condolences on the loss of your sister. When did you lose your sister?
On the 12th of February.
That's so fresh. So fresh. I would say, Cami, if you actually are up and about and going to work and so forth, that you're doing a lot more than most people would be able to. So I would please ask you to give yourself credit for that. And that idea of feeling like a robot, thank God for the, your nervous system that actually jumps in to, keep you on those routines. I'd offer you this. Do you feel like you've had enough time outside of your, your schedule, your routine for like getting the work going? Do you feel like you were able to give yourself some time to just be with your grief?
No. Since she passed, it's just been, the funeral planning, and right after the funeral, I just went straight back to work. Yeah, and that has been my routine.
I wonder if before you get to how do you get off the cycle of feeling like you're in autopilot, which is again, it's a helpful thing that our body and brain can do for us, would be what resources or what opportunities there might be for you to carve out a little bit of time, even if it's the, you know, I know if you're in the States, most workplaces only give a couple or 3 days, but of going back either to your HR if you at work or to your doctor, primary care, and asking them to write for some time, you know, a week or so, where you can just get off the automatic control and just give yourself some time to grieve your loss. And it won't be enough, but it'll be a start. Because my concern for not taking some sort of time, one, to catch up your body with your emotions and process, ultimately you might burn out. And you don't want that, because I'm sure you also have other responsibilities that you're trying to stay afloat. So is there an opportunity to either go back to your HR for time? And if not, usually if you're in the States, you go to your primary care doctor and say, I need time. And sometimes it can write for you to take a few days off that you can take back to your HR. That's where I would start. There are many tips and strategies I can offer you, but all of them have to do with beginning to be at a place where you've sat with yourself to really process having lost your sister.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good
Good
evening.
And
evening.
thanks to everyone, because I'm really being blessed by the questions and Christine, your responses. Going back to guilt, I think the final thing that you said was pull out the drawer, please. Just help me here. I hope I got it correctly. And you close it back. All right. Where at what point in my mind, what point do you empty this drawer completely, rather than what is in that drawer that you have to go back to it and then you watch it, okay, and then you push it back. When do you empty that drawer of the guilt?
Yeah, excellent question. Thank you for asking that. So what I tried to paint a picture was from that starting point, right, where you can say these feelings that I'm feeling are tied to guilt. And again, I'm not faulting myself. I'm not shaming myself. I'm just admitting that's what those emotions are. And then you take some steps and then you put it back. What will happen eventually, because you're carving out space and time to address it a little bit, is you will find that there will be longer and longer periods between when it's coming up for you as a thing that's in the background in your heart. Because I said to close the drawer so that you can focus on the priorities in your life.
Okay.
Right? So what you will find over time is that need and desire to go back to the drawer where it's coming up again as a thing that's, gnawing at your heart or gnawing in the back of your brain will get longer and longer. And when that begins to happen, so a couple of things. If it's tied to death, if someone has passed away, you get to decide that, okay, I've done all the pieces that I need to do. I've forgiven myself. I've forgiven them because they're not here. I accepted their forgiveness because they can't offer it if they're not here. And I'm going to let this go now. Right? So you can choose that. If it's with a relationship of a person who's still here and there's estrangement or abandonment, after you've done your pull out the drawer, check it, try a couple of steps, nothing happens, you can decide. And the one caveat I say with deciding is you can say, you know what, I'm not carrying this burden anymore and I'm going to dump out that drawer. But I want us all to please be aware that you can always pick it back up again, because I don't want us to think that you choose, it can sort of put yourself back in a situation of guilt and shame because you're like, I'm choosing to let it go. And then sometime in the future, something happens or doesn't happen. You say, oh, it was my fault because I am the one who let it go. As long as we're here, even in the cases of abandonment or estrangement, right, there's always the opportunity to attempt to pick it back up. But you get to choose, okay, I've taken these particular steps, forgiveness, I've reached out, I've done this, I can take that drawer, empty it out and move. It's also important, that may not be the case for anyone in this room, but it's also important that sometimes that happens sooner rather than later. If it's a situation where you are being harmed or abused or anything like that, that needs to happen fairly quickly. And again, no shame, fault to be held to that, because you need to protect yourself first. Your first obligation is to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
My second question, sorry, is how can I help my mom deal with the passing of my sister? Because they were really close. Yeah, they were just really close, and I know it's affecting her, but she's just not showing any emotions at all. So how can I help her deal with that?
I have two questions for you, and I'll ask them at the end of what I'm going to say. I think it's a great thing that you're asking that question. Thank you. I would say one of the first ways you can help your mom deal with the loss of her child, your sister, is by taking care of you first. It's not selfish. But it's not an answer that we often want to hear, but I really want us to be real with ourselves. You have to make sure you're taking care of you first, so that then you actually have the capacity and the space to be able to support her in whatever way she might need when she actually chooses to engage or begins to show what's actually going with her or how she's feeling. That's the first thing. The second thing I'll say is, remember we said that everybody is unique. And so I would just encourage you to let her know you're there, because she may be feeling, okay, she doesn't want to burden you. You lost your sister. So there's that piece going on, and you don't have to necessarily explain it other than saying that you're here. And when she is ready to engage, listening, being present, but especially for the loss of a parent or a child, finding her some support that's outside of you. And again, depending on where you are, there are many places. There's online resources, there are local resources that we can make sure we get you. If you, but we don't have to chat. But let him or Anne-Marie know what state you're in, that I can get connected for you. But having those queued up to get her support that's outside of you. If she's in a church community, that's one place that with advocacy you can inform people. People would already know, I imagine, from the funeral and all of that. But to reach out and let people know that it might be helpful to check in, whoever the right folks are that do that work, that it might be helpful to check in with her and reach out. But she may not be anywhere near ready to have any conversation or anything about it. So while you get ready to be available for her, you've got to take care of yourself. And then when she's ready, listening, being present, letting her know it's perfectly okay to feel all the feels that she's feeling. It's probably a combination of every kind of emotion, including a lot of probably anger, as that's out of order. No parent wants to bury their child.
Yeah, there's a lot of anger. Yeah.
And again, when she truly gets into it, you may not be the most appropriate person to hold that with her. In processing your loss, or while you're going through grief and mourning, what you do about, or sorry, that how okay is it or is not about holding on to personal effects of your loved one or personal items. And I want to say, in this work, we call that memorial items, anything that was tied to your loved one or the situation or so forth that has sentimental value. And as long as it is a help to you, definitely that you can hold on to this. It is not abnormal. It is not unnatural. It is not, doesn't make you like a baby, whatever, because we put all kinds of things on ourselves in those situations. But when we lose loved ones, their favorite, the thing that carries their smell, their favorite perfume, I still and stop dead in my tracks every time I smell poison. The perfume, dead in my tracks. If I was swimming, I'd probably drown because it stops me dead in my tracks, because that's my mother's perfume, right? And it takes me back to that place. So memorial items, personal effects that are meaningful and helpful as you go along, again, to bring you back to a place where you feel like you're with your person, that is totally okay to do. I think the one thing I would say is, if you find yourself using them in a way that actually are triggering a depth of negativity, right? So sometimes, in not wanting to engage with trying to move through guilt over time, I don't mean 2 weeks, 3 months, 6, I don't mean that, I mean years, we may use memorial items, personal effects, to pull us back into that initial deep grief place. Sometimes it can be really cleansing. Sometimes it can be really healing. Sometimes you just need a good cry. I get it. But I want to say plainly with all of us that if you find yourself or you're using those items to pull you back in a way that isn't serving you, or that you're avoiding other things in your life, or avoiding dealing with other situations that are priority right now, then I would say you might need to exercise caution, ask for help, talk with someone for like, could you, keep this for me? I'm finding myself using it as a crutch, but this sort of thing. And again, I'm just trying to be really plain spoken with us, because, I mean, if I'm not, what's the point?
Christine, thank you very much. This was so insightful. And I think the key point that you made at the end here is, no matter what it is you're going through, that taking care of yourself and making sure that you're in a healthy place is key to helping anybody else or to continuing to help yourself.
So Anne-Marie, I'm sorry, just a couple of closing thoughts. And by that, I mean, that's just the basics, right? That you're eating food and that you're trying to sleep if you can, that you're getting fresh air. Again, basics, but really important when, again, your whole body's being hijacked by this cascade of emotions and hormones that you feel like you have no control over. There's one last thing that I'd love to share with everyone in the room, that even I, doing this work since 2017, and again, being an adult orphan, as they will call it in the work, with no parents, no grandparents, nobody, just me, y'all, and obviously my husband and family. I found this a couple of years ago during COVID, and it has been so helpful to just know that there is this thing that exists that gives you permission and that gets you. So I'll introduce it here. We will send it in the resources, but has anyone ever heard of, when you go to your doctor's office or the clinic, on the wall, they have the patient bill of rights? And it says, you have the right to know your diagnosis, for someone to talk to you and respectfully for them, explain things and so forth. And all, you see it in hospitals. Well, there is a grief psychologist. His name is Dr. Alan Wolfelt, and a few years ago he wrote something called the Mourner's Bill of Rights, and it is specifically for, again, people who are going through grief. And I'm going to read them out for all of us, because I wish I had it back in 2004 when I lost my mom. I definitely wish I even knew such a thing existed back when I lost my father at 11, because everybody just ignores the children, especially in Africa. It's like you go back to school. But here it goes. The Mourner's Bill of Rights by Dr. Alan Wolfelt. You have the right to experience your own unique grief. You have the right to talk about your grief. You have the right to feel a multitude of emotions. You have the right to be tolerant of your physical and emotional limits. You have the right to experience grief attacks. You have the right to make use of ritual and ceremony. You have the right to embrace your spirituality. You have the right to search for meaning. You have the right to treasure your memories. You have the right to move toward your grief and heal.
All right, so it's almost 20 past, so I am going to let that be the closing. Great closing, Kristen. And then again, if you want to find out more about DAHEI, it's DAHEI, the Dominican Health and Education Initiative, DAHEI.org. You can find more information about the organization.
Thank you,
Thanks a
everyone.
lot. Thank you very much.
Okay,
All right. Bye-bye.
bye-bye.